Hey guys, Mr. Breen here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about inflation. So our definition of inflation is basically going to be that it's a general increase in prices. Notice the word general. Okay, this doesn't mean that one price went up. Oh, there was inflation in candy bars. No, that's not what we're talking about. Okay, we're talking about a general increase in most prices across the economy. An increase in the price of candy bars, that's a microeconomic concern. A macroeconomic concern is what prices in general are doing. Okay, for some terminology, its opposite is deflation. This is when there's a general decrease in prices. Okay, when the level of inflation is still positive, so we don't have deflation, it's still positive, but it's going down, so it's decreasing, we're going to call that disinflation. And if it's very, very high, okay, 10% is not yet this, but very, very high, we're going to call that hyperinflation. So what are some of the problems with this? Well, if you have very high inflation, and here I will count something like 10%, that's pretty high. Okay, that introduces an element of uncertainty in the economy. So it might discourage businesses from investing because they don't really know what's going to happen with prices in the future. Okay, it also erodes the value of people's savings. So if you have, $100 saved up and, next year the dollar is half as valuable as it was last year, then the real value of your savings would have gone from $100 to only $50. Okay, that's bad. We don't like that. We don't want to punish people for saving, generally speaking. Okay, it also erodes your purchasing power, very simply, right? Something that cost $1 today maybe will cost $1.10, next year, and that's sort of generally unsettling. But it shouldn't be a huge problem, since inflation means all prices are going up, including the price of labor, which means if all the prices in the economy go up by 10%, well, so should your income. So it shouldn't make that big a difference, right? Yeah, everything costs 10% now, higher, but you're making 10% more. Unless you're not making 10% more because your income has been fixed at some previous point. For example, if you're living on a pension with a defined benefit. So, you've contributed to your pension over decades, and then at the end you're going to get a certain amount per month, and that amount stays the same even though there's some inflation potentially. Well, it's really bad for them. In other words, inflation is particularly bad for savers and the elderly. Often savers and the elderly are the very same people, but very high inflation is bad for them. Now, deflation is very, very bad because it doesn't erode the value of savings. It actually increases the value of savings. It seems good, but instead it increases the real amount of your debt. So if you borrow $10,000 for school, I know that's so much, right? Most of you are going to borrow much more than that for school. If you borrow that much for school, and over the course of your time in school, the dollar becomes 4 times as valuable, well, it's going to seem as though you owe $40,000, and that could be really detrimental. Okay. It also decreases consumer demand, weirdly enough. You would think that if prices go down, that consumers would say, hey, prices are lower, let's buy more stuff. But in reality, what people actually do is they wait for prices to go down more. So what happens is consumer spending ends up going down. So who is deflation really hard on? Well, it's difficult for borrowers, which is many, many people, and it's very difficult for businesses. I know, boo-hoo, right? But these are the people who employ everyone. Okay, so where does inflation come from? Well, there are a few different ways of thinking about inflation, a few different possible causes of inflation, but one is that it's a change in the quantity of money. So in other words, if the money supply, or if GDP grows by 3%, okay, but the money supply grows by 5%, there's going to be some inflation. Okay, there's more money chasing around fewer goods, or there's more money than there used to be compared to the amount of goods. If you have 3% inflation and a 3%, okay, and a 3% increase in the money supply, you have no inflation or deflation. And if GDP grows by 3% and the money supply only grows by 1%, then you're going to get deflation. So under this sort of idea, certain kinds of inflation can be controlled by just controlling the growth of the money supply. Okay, there's also demand pull theory inflation, and this is when aggregate demand goes way, way up, probably relatively quickly. So let's say aggregate demand goes up. Well, what's going to happen here is that the price level will increase. Okay, yeah, GDP will go up, and that's nice. GDP will go up, okay, but the price level will go up as well, okay, which is inflation. So a very common cause of this is if the country goes to war. Okay, suddenly we need way more resources than we have access to because we're going to build a lot more tanks and planes and stuff like that. Okay, and aggregate supply won't just magically go up because we need more stuff, right? It would be nice if the world worked like that. Instead, our aggregate supply sort of plods along as it always did, and aggregate demand goes way up, so the price level is much higher. That's demand pull inflation. Then there's cost push inflation, which instead results usually from a negative supply shock. So instead of aggregate demand changing, what this means is that aggregate supply has decreased. Okay, and as you can see, this causes the price level to go up and GDP to go down. You might also think of this in terms of stagflation, because you're seeing GDP go down. GDP is lower, and the price level goes up, okay, which is inflation. It's cost push inflation. Because it's now costlier for businesses to produce the same amount as they used to make, and they have to pass some of those costs on to producers in the form of higher prices. Now, sometimes people will talk about a wage price spiral, which is sort of a specific kind of cost push inflation where if, let's say that unemployment is very low. So if businesses want to expand, they have to offer a higher wage to tempt more people into the workforce. So wages go up. Wages go up. But because wages are higher, because the business's costs are higher, they also have to raise prices. But when prices go up, people will start demanding a higher wage, so wages go up again. And then if they're demanding a higher wage and receiving a higher wage, well, businesses have to pass some of the costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices, and so on.